Welcome to Murder Mile UK True Crime. This isn't a video, it's an audio experience. The only images you'll need for this episode are these. So close your eyes, open your mind, and savour the sounds of Murder Mile. How do you prove a murder without a body? Find out on Murder Mile. This is Frognall Rise in Hampstead, NW3. 4 streets west of the murderous mother-in-law, Stylu Christophe. 2 streets south of the home of pathologist Sir Bernard Spilsbury. And 1 street north of the bungling burglar who broke the bank and then broke his neck. Coming soon to Murder Mile. Off Hampstead Heath, in one of the poshest parts of London, sits the Mount Vernon Estate, comprising of 3 mansion blocks of opulent apartments with many flats costing upwards of £2 million. Owned by mostly corporations, it's the kind of place a shady Russian oligarch might live believing he's an English gentleman. By calling his Egyptian butler Jeeves, by drinking tea with his pinky finger raised high, by saying "one does" instead of "I", by eating posh chip butties and having filthy dreams about the Queen. With high gates, security guards and CCTV, here money can buy you privacy, but not always safety. Back in 2006, Flat 9 of the Pavilion Court on the Mount Vernon Estate was the plush matrimonial home of Mr and Mrs Ekaireb. For Li Hua and Robert, their whirlwind romance meant they married just 7 months after they had met. And with a baby on the way, it should have been the perfect start. But having married a jealous and controlling monster, Li became a hostage in her own home. She lived in abject fear, and just 2.5 weeks after her own wedding, she lost everything, including her life. My name is Michael, I'm your tour guide, and this is Murder Mile. Episode 303, Dirty Money. To tell Li's story, we need to travel 5,000 miles east to Dalian, a Chinese coastal city famed as one of the busiest shipping ports in East Asia. It's wreathed in modern architecture, being a financial centre, and with a wealth of sandy beaches and seafood markets, it's a hotspot for tourists and expats. Born in 1979, Li Hua Cao, which translates as pear blossom, but aptly also means pretty and talented, was one of 4 children with 1 brother and 2 sisters in a loyal and loving working-class family with an incredible bond, which, regardless of their distance, always kept them together. As a traditional Chinese girl, for Li, her family was everything. Their happiness and prosperity was her goal. But with her parents divorced and having to live with an aunt, by her 20s, she wanted to better herself, but with limited options in Dalian, Li and her brother Li Bin looked towards the west. Many mistook Li as simply small and pretty, being just 4 foot 11 inches tall and roughly 80 pounds. But dubbed a fire dragon, although warm and loving, Li was also strong, smart and independent. So in 2002, aged just 21, keen to learn English, Li and her brother travelled to Cork and Dublin in the Republic of Ireland. As a student, she worked as a waitress. But with her tips and wages biting her tight budget, she began working as a lap dancer. Some tabloids have made this sound seedy, but being protected from gropes and drunks by bouncers, she earned a month's wage in a night for doing little more than hot yoga. In November 2005, at an unnamed Dublin strip club, a client paid Li £270 for a 5-minute lap dance. He was the man who would marry her. But just 11 months from this moment, he would also murder her. Born in Hendon, West London, in the autumn of 1974, Robert David Ekaireb was raised in privilege. His pampered childhood was spent in the affluent suburbs of Hampstead and Finchley. He went to all of the best fee-paying grammar schools, and he never had to worry about anything as his father was minted. Rex Solomon Ekaireb was a chartered accountant who in the 1980s set up a company at 45 Hatton Gardens in London's Jewellery Quarter. By 1986, purchased by a larger company, R&R Wholesale Jewellery became one of the largest sellers of wedding rings to the high street retailer Argos, making Rex incredibly wealthy. And as he invested his fortune into properties, his influence and power only got greater. By the time Robert left school in 1990, unlike his brother, who had become a successful banker at Goldman Sachs, he joined the family business. Like his father, he was shrewd. And although in 1998, aged just 24, Robert set up his own company, Cuzzy Properties, from that very same office in Hatton Gardens. Later described as a wealthy jeweller and a property developer owning a £65 million empire, it all spawned from his father's hard work. A familiar trope, as when things got dicey, Robert always ran back to his daddy. Having met over a lap dance, paid for, let's not forget, by Robert, he and Li quickly became an item. To many, they seem like an odd couple. A tiny Chinese lady barely the size of a child, and a 6'2" 18-stone Iraqi Jewish Hulk, whose face barely cracked a smile, and whose eyes scanned in suspicion. In court, his defense counsel painted an unfair picture of Li as a gold digger, who saw this far from handsome multimillionaire as her cash cow. In truth, she was a dutiful Chinese daughter who put her family always before herself, and as detectives later stated, her whole life was to support them. But what I find saddest is, despite that, I think she really wanted to be a good wife for him, and she would have been. Li wanted it to work. But because of who Robert was, the relationship was doomed to failure. Everything you need to know about Robert can be gleaned from the way he lived his life. He never lived further than a few miles away from his father, and the two of them owned many of the same properties. As a strict Jew, he only ate kosher food and never worked, drove, or used electricity on the Shabbat. And diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, he constantly scribbled in notebooks, getting through as many as 50 biros a day. Many of the clothes in his walk-in wardrobe were still sealed in their original packaging. And unable to touch dirty laundry, he had several suitcases hidden away from earlier trips to Paris, Venice, Prague and Euro Disney that remained unopened and unwashed. Maybe it's a sign of his childish ways and his obsession with himself, or some might say his low self-esteem. He had a £3 million teddy bear collection, a fleet of prestigious cars including a Bentley, a bedside phone shaped like Mickey Mouse with its number plate being his own name, and he owned a golden iPod which was engraved in diamonds with the words, "I am Robert Ekaireb, the one and only." But mostly, we know what kind of a man he was through his past relationships with women. In 2000, 5 years before he met Li, Robert was madly in love with Martina Kamenistikov of Slovakia. Little is known about their life together, except he showered her with expensive gifts. He set her up in flat 3 of Gainsborough House on the Mount Vernon Estate, a lavish 3-bedroomed apartment with a gold-plated toilet and a gold leaf carpet embroidered with a Versace logo. But having had enough of his obsessive, manipulative and controlling ways, when Martina left him, he locked the doors for 7 years and never returned, leaving the flat like a time capsule or a shrine to his lost love. Everything in his life he had to own and control. even the women he claimed to love. Detectives would later state, Robert saw Leigh as a pretty Chinese doll who he could do what he'd like with, and no one would care. But as a fiercely independent fire dragon, he more than met his match. The first few months of their romance was as ordinary as any other, as this odd couple from different worlds learned what made each other tick. As he was devoutly Jewish, she only ate kosher food and lived a solitary life on the Shabbat. He wouldn't let her cook, but she assumed this was just a cultural thing. She was sympathetic to his obsessive behaviours, and although he showered his lover with gifts and paid for everything, she thought it odd that she had no money of her own, and he wouldn't let her work. In July 2006, just 7 months after they had met, even though her family had urged Leigh to slow down, they travelled to China and married. He already controlled her finances. Now he controlled her life. During the trip, Leigh's sister witnessed an argument between the couple, which resulted in bruises to her arm and scratches to his chest. The police were called, and although he should have been charged with assault, it was dropped when he agreed to make monthly payments to her parents. Everything Leigh was doing was for them, and yet for Robert, he always knew he could buy his way out of trouble. Returning from China, in the first week of August, Robert moved his blushing bride into Flat 9, a second-floor, one-bedroomed apartment in Pavilion Court on the Mount Vernon Estate in Hampstead, just a few doors down from the sealed time capsule that he once shared with his ex-lover, Martina. As an exclusive gated community for the wealthy, Leigh was shielded from the evils of the world outside. But inside, it must have seemed like she had everything that money could buy. From the latest fashions to fancy gadgets, to a large pristine apartment full of designer furniture, marble floors, a gold-plated toilet, and a £45,000 cream carpet in one of the 6 flats on the estate that he co-owned with his father. But what she lacked in her life was happiness and freedom. One of the porters said, Robert came across as a nice chap, but he had a nasty temper. Robert's temper was volatile. His mood swung from apathetic to fiery in seconds, as he was terrified that Leigh would return to her old life, with the irony being that he'd met her when he paid her for a lap dance. He was so paranoid that he constantly checked her phone and forbade her from ever having friends. He controlled her money, her life, her existence. He treated her like an object. And now, conceived in the second week of June, before they married in China, she was 3 months pregnant with his baby. It was no mystery to anyone that Leigh wanted to escape his control. She had barely known him for a year, and yet she had tried to leave him at least 6 times, with the first one just 1 week after they'd moved in. On the 15th of August, just 9 weeks before her murder, Leigh fled the flat. In her broken English, she sent him a text saying, "You will not love me. Enjoy your life. You are a big bad man." Replying in seconds, Robert pleaded with her, "Leigh, I am crying my eyes out. I am going to kill myself. Without you, there is no life. You are carrying my baby. Please tell me where you are. I am dying." But she responded, "No chance for you. You are sick. You can't find me anymore. We are finished. I don't love you no more." That day, he flooded her phone with dozens of calls and messages. On one occasion, he had previously sent 64 in a row, begging, "Leigh, please, I'm not bad. I will do anything. Please give me one more chance. I know I'm wrong. I love you more than anything in the world." Anything, not anyone. And having reported her missing to the police, although she said she was scared of him, she agreed to come back if he changed. That night he picked her up, drove her to flat 9, and promised he'd move heaven and earth to make her happy. 2 weeks later, he assaulted her. On the 28th of August, just 7 weeks before her murder, having dined at an exclusive restaurant in the West End, they were in the midst of a blazing row as Robert drove them home. He said it was because he hated her smoking while she was pregnant. She said he was jealous of her past. Driving up the high road, their shouts and screams were heard by passers-by. Suddenly the car swerved. Leigh dashed out, and when the police arrived, she was found cowering inside of East Finchley Food and Wine, an off-licence at 334 High Road. She was distressed, with cuts and grazes to her arms and head. Robert was arrested for Leigh's assault and possession of a flick knife, but being persuaded to withdraw the charges by Robert's father, Rex, having again promised to change. She later gave the police a statement which read, "My husband has never been violent towards me." And yet the next time he would kill her. Over the following weeks, becoming increasingly paranoid, he accused her of cheating on him, even though he was sleeping around. In August, he hired a private detective to follow her, believing she was going back to lap dancing. And by the fateful month of October, he had booked a polygraph machine as he didn't believe that the baby was his. He controlled every aspect of her life. And then, seemingly as a mere formality, on the 4th of October, he had them both marry in a simple ceremony at Barnet Registry Office, trapping her forever under English law. She married him again, but she wanted out, feeling strangled by his suffocation. She told her friends and family she was leaving for good. She withdrew £1,800 from a Lloyd's bank account she had opened in secret. She told a trusted ally, Yin Chun, she'd even work as an escort girl rather than live with him a second longer. And on the 19th of September, just 4 weeks prior, she scheduled to terminate the baby. She never went ahead with the abortion, as maybe, deep down, she hoped there was a chance. But oddly, that same month, in a conversation protected by doctor-patient confidentiality, he admitted, "I feel unsafe by my own anger." And although he also claimed, "Of course, I would never do this," he also confessed, "I've had thoughts about stabbing Lee to death." Robert said it was just a paranoid fantasy. But soon, it would become a horrific reality. Little is known about what happened on Monday the 23rd of October 2006. That evening, Leigh was alone in flat 9. Her bored whistle echoed the cold cavernous walls, as with Robert out and her family 5,000 miles away, she stroked the swollen bump of her pregnant belly. Yet it's uncertain if, that night, she'd already packed her bags to leave. There was no witness to what happened, yet the evidence told the truth. Leigh's last known sighting was never recorded. But from the flat, 4 times that day, Leigh had telephoned her brother in Denmark with a final call at 8 p.m. precisely, in which she stated she was unhappy. At 10:53 p.m, she called Robert's mobile. The reason for the call is unknown. And at 11:07 p.m, Robert's key fob to the car park of the Mount Vernon Estate was activated. CCTV captured his Bentley arriving, and he was witnessed by the security guard in the lodge, who noted it in the estate's logbook. At roughly 11:10 p.m, Robert entered flat 9 on the 2nd floor. And that is all we know for certain. He told the court, "She left me, packed her bags, said her family needed her, and never saw her again. As this terrified lady, whose life he had dominated in full for almost a year, he supposedly let her walk free, of which there was no CCTV of Li leaving, nor did she pass a porter or a security guard with her bags. That night, an unnamed witness in the block said they heard a woman screaming, but did nothing. How he killed her remains unknown, but we know it happened between 11:12 p.m. and 11:43 p.m. As at 11:44 p.m, Robert did something he always did when things got dicey. He went running back to his daddy. He claimed he called his father as he was upset because Li had left him. And yet, just past midnight, this man who struggled with OCD and had cases of used clothes as he couldn't touch old laundry, suddenly had an overwhelming urge to remove a heavy roll of cream-coloured bedroom carpet from a flat he had lived in for just 9 weeks. And as seen on CCTV camera and by the security, he loaded it into the boot of his car, and having driven 5 miles south in his father's car, at 1:40 a.m, he arrived in Soho. At 1:08 a.m, supposedly distraught that Li had left him, Robert phoned the manager of Club Tantra, a celebrity nightclub at 62 Kingsley Street, just off Carnaby Street. That was the last call ever made from the phone in the flat, and Robert never returned there, ever again. He claimed he went clubbing to drown his sorrows. We know he drove his father's car as he was given a parking ticket on nearby Beak Street. But his real reason for being there wasn't to let off steam, but to dispose of Li's body. Club Tantra was run by a member of the Addams family, the infamous Clerkenwell crime syndicate, who it is alleged ran extortion rackets, armed robberies, and were responsible for up to 25 murders, with one former member having confessed to dismembering and dumping at least 4 bodies. The prosecution stated Robert used his alleged underworld connections to have her body disposed of, and although it sounds far-fetched, in April 2015, Robert's father Rex was charged with converting criminal property to launder cash for Michael Adams, the brother of Terry, the syndicate's godfather. After this, Robert went to live with his parents and stated he never returned to flat 9, even though between 9:45 on the 8th of November and 12:04 a.m. on the 9th, his key fob was repeatedly used. Across the next 8 weeks, the flat was professionally cleaned, possibly by the gang's own experts in forensics, as not a single bloodstain was ever found. They bleached every surface, painted every wall, shined the marble floor until it was spotless, and the £45,000 cream carpet was replaced with an exact copy. Robert claimed, "I had it professionally cleaned as a condition of the letting," and that just weeks after they'd moved in, both he and Li had planned to move to another flat, which he owned nearby at Heathview Court. On the 21st of December 2006, the murder flat was rented out, and an unlucky tenant moved in. Days after the murder, Robert was said to be in a zombified state, as seen by Richard Bailey, a porter at the Mount Vernon Estate, who said, "As they pulled up, I went to speak to Robert and his father. Robert just sat there, staring straight ahead. He didn't say a word." And although Li had vanished, supposedly taking her baby with her, he hadn't called the police. He made no effort to find her. He didn't call or text her phone. And just 7 days later, he tried to rekindle the relationship with his old flame, Martina. But a person simply can't disappear, especially a woman who was 5 months pregnant. On the 7th of November, Li missed her 6-month pregnancy scan, and using her mobile, Robert lied to the midwife as to why. With the family growing concerned, As much as he manipulated Leigh's life when she was alive, he did the same in her death, as Robert tried to leave a false trail that she was still living, but wanted to be left alone. He told her family,
"She left me. She's run away with someone."
He texted Leigh's friend as if he was his wife, writing,
"This is a message from Li Hua. Does Tina Hong Yu still live with you?"
And in very poor Mandarin, he called Leigh's sister to tell her,
"Lei's given birth to a baby girl,"
even though she was 4 months premature. By Sunday the 18th of February 2007, having neither seen nor physically spoken to Li, except for a few texts in bad English, having failed to wish her family a happy Chinese New Year, they reported her missing. As part of the inquiry, Robert gave 4 voluntary interviews. He stated she left him in mid-November, not October. That she'd walked out on him 5 times prior, which the police had evidence of. He said he didn't know where she had gone, but suspected she'd returned to Ireland, possibly as a lap dancer. And with no evidence of wrongdoing, with Li being a free spirit, used to travelling and having many short-term relationships, the investigation was no longer actively pursued. Leigh's parents couldn't tell her elderly grandparents that she was missing or possibly dead for fear that it would kill them. So instead, believing she'd simply run away, they stated, "We have to put up with them slagging her off, telling us what a bad daughter she is." When the truth was much darker and sinister. Leigh's body was never found. Whether the gang had dismembered her body, dissolved it in acid, burned it, or buried it on the 560 acres of wasteland with old warehouses, a disused canal, tunnels and sewers in Stratford, which 2 weeks before the murder it had been announced that Robert McAlpine had won the contract to build the 2012 Olympic Stadium there, with construction not starting until the 22nd of May 2008. Detectives believed, but couldn't prove, that this was where her body had been dumped, as the gang's expensive lawyers had blocked any attempt to question them. Detective Inspector Andy Manning of the investigation stated, "We will never know how Li died or what happened to her body." But her family never gave up hope, nor quit the pressure to seek the truth. In 2009, the case was referred to the Homicide and Serious Crime Command. But owing to the passage of time, so much evidence was missing. The flat was clean. A witness had died. The logbooks were binned. The CCTV had been routinely erased after 14 days. And although extensive proof-of-life inquiries were made in Ireland, China, Japan, and right across Europe, nothing suggested that Li or her baby were alive after that date. Getting on with his life, having got away with murder. By 2012, Robert had a 2-year-old daughter and another baby on the way with his new long-term partner. He thought he was free. But you don't need a body to prove a murder. You just need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a murder has been committed. For years, police had built a brick-by-brick case of circumstantial evidence to prove his guilt, including the flat, its cleanup, the calls, the arguments, the assault, and that since the 23rd of October 2006 at 8 p.m, no one had spoken to her, and her bank accounts, emails, phones, and passport had remained untouched. It was impossible not to leave a trace of yourself in a digital world for 7 whole years. Then at a storage unit rented by Robert and his father Rex, police found Leigh's wedding ring. And on the 7th of June 2012, Robert was arrested and charged as he tried to fly to Prague on a one-way ticket. The 10-week trial began at the Old Bailey before Judge Nicholas Cook QC in October 2013. 39-year-old Robert pleaded not guilty, but owing to the weight of circumstantial evidence, even without a body found, on the 19th of December 2013, he was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 20 years. This being a higher tariff, as he'd refused to say where the body had been buried. Judge Cook described him as callous, manipulative, and a selfish hypocrite.
Your disposal of the body is a very serious aggravating feature.
And having maintained his innocence throughout,
the bereaved will have suffered agonies of false hope. This was a murder of a pregnant wife, so in that sense you have ended 2 lives. This is a case of extreme domestic violence in a bullying and controlling relationship.
The Crown's chief prosecutor said,
After 7 years of deception and denial, Robert Ekaireb has now been brought to justice for the murder of Li Hua Cao. Ekaireb wove a web of lies in order to deflect suspicion away from him. I hope that this conviction today can provide some small comfort for Li's family.
But bullish to the last, Robert lodged an appeal on the 29th of October 2015, claiming his lead counsel was incompetent and rendering his conviction unsafe, that he suffered from depression and OCD, and that, coincidentally, he'd miraculously been diagnosed with Asperger's, a form of autism, which he said impacted his questioning by the detectives. In the years since Li vanished, he has never expressed any loss or grief at the wife and baby he would never see again, nor about her family who could never bury her or fully grieve her passing. On the 16th of December 2015, his appeal was rejected. And as of today, Robert Ekaireb remains in prison until at least 2035. And it was all because of dirty money.